Alright, let's see if we can't burn some bridges. Amazon's Lord of the Rings spin-off is fine, I assume. I don't know, I've not seen it. Who gives a shit? Now, let's talk about how Hollywood studios conspired to fuck over a country. It's been covered a bit before. There's the Lindsay Ellis video. But there's been sort of a steady stream of more information to come out about what happened and developments since, and the story has only got weirder. So I thought it'd be worth maybe just doing sort of a straightforward rundown of what happened out here in the beautiful New Zealand scenery, without resorting to jokes. The coward's way out. Now, the billionaire Peter Jackson was initially known for making like knockoff Sam Raimi movies and also writing angry letters to the government demanding more funding, which, fair play to them, he did get. So if you've ever enjoyed anything that Peter Jackson has ever made, remember that is the direct result of public arts funding. Now, his career continued to grow. I'll just give you the highlights. He worked on bigger and bigger projects. He continued to sort of pull favors from friends and underpay people and stuff. His special effects companies expanded. He sued negative reviewers for defamation. He became increasingly combative with the New Zealand Film Commission, and he discovered a tax loophole in New Zealand that would allow international productions to be made here incredibly cheaply. Fast forward a bit and he's trying to write a fantasy epic. The only problem is he doesn't know how to write one. So he does what I think any of us would do in that position. He goes to Harvey Weinstein and asks for the rights to Tolkien. He gets that, he develops that, and the scope expands massively to the point that Harvey Weinstein doesn't want to fund it anymore, but not to worry, he has this tax loophole up his sleeve, so it's not too much trouble to get it financed by New Line. And Lord of the Rings gets made and it comes out. Now, they cost something like $300 to $600 million to make, and the Inland Revenue Department of New Zealand estimates that the cost of that to the government was $300 to $400 million. However, you know, it was a great New Zealand piece of work to be proud of, and something that we could do a tourism push with, which was broadly pretty successful, right? You talk to anyone internationally, one of the few things they know about New Zealand is Lord of the Rings was shot here. And there is this thing called Tolkien tourism. At the time, 6% of international visitors said that the reason they came to New Zealand was because of Lord of the Rings. And there is an often repeated statistic that from 2001 to 2006, there was a 40% increase in the annual tourism influx to New Zealand. The implication being, you know, because the Lord of the Rings movies were released from 2001 to 2003. I think it's a bit of an iffy statistic, primarily because it's wrong. There was a 34% increase in the annual tourism influx, and a 34% increase over a 6-year period is completely average. That is the normal amount of growth that we normally expect. It's a number that's been beaten before and since. However, the fucking idiot consumerist tourists who come here because of Lord of the Rings do spend more money. So that's cool. So, the government wants to close this tax loophole because it's a real fucking bad one. But they don't want to completely shut out Hollywood productions because, you know, it was cool that we made a big movie here in New Zealand, and it did have this tourism growth. So they cook up the large budget screen production grant, which I believe is the first of its kind. Basically, any big international film production would get 12.5% of whatever they spent here returned to them. So for every $2 they spend, they get 25 cents back from the government, with a cap at $40 million per year. So we're not going to hemorrhage money like we did on Lord of the Rings, but we can still be an attractive location for filming. And the theory was, we'll do this for a bit, you know, set up our film industry, maybe get the next Lord of the Rings under our belt, and then we'll turn off the tap and be entirely self-reliant. Little did we know how bad things would get. Now, some other things happened, and I'm going to cover these off just loosely in order, and it's going to be, oh, why did you even bring that up? It's all important, and it all pays off later, okay? This is where it fits chronologically in the story. Now, with the success of Lord of the Rings, the Weta Group is expanding massively and becoming our national pride and joy. However, this sudden massive expansion, especially with the people in charge being sort of, terrible phrase, dude bro man children, the company develops a pretty vile culture. Beyond the general overwork and mismanagement that you'd expect, there's a lot of sexual harassment and bullying, a lot of alcohol in the workplace, and they're openly sharing and viewing porn, with the stuff not really being public knowledge at the time, and dismissed as just being, guys being guys, and that's just how they communicate there, through porn. Now, a model worker from one of the offshoot model shops set up for Lord of the Rings felt that he was fired unfairly, which is a big deal here. We have solid enough labor laws. You can't just do that. You can't just fire an employee. But the thing was, on paper at least, he wasn't an employee, he was a contractor, so employment law wouldn't apply. But the case was argued that he was full-time. To his knowledge, he was basically an employee. He had training, so the case was ruled in his favour. Now, also in labour relations, the New Zealand Actors Union became an independent office of the Australian Media Union. Basically, they operate freely, do negotiations for actors in New Zealand all by themselves, but they have the backing of this Australian union. And then the global financial crisis happened, with the New Zealand dollar plummeting to 55 cents US. In the wake of this, the billionaire Peter Jackson starts development on The Hobbit. And as production gets into gear, New Zealand Actors Equity decides to use this moment to try and negotiate a better deal for New Zealand talent. As it turns out, New Zealand actors on Lord of the Rings have been paid less than the international talent. They weren't given residuals where international talent was, and some felt that they were let go unfairly. And being contractors, they had no recourse through employment law. As well as, more broadly, there were concerns about overtime, the work conditions, the lack of health and safety. It's not a clean demand that fits on a t-shirt, but Actors Equity was just throwing it all out there trying to get a win. Now, the Producers Association had always refused to meet with Actors Equity, and now Warner Brothers was doing the same thing. The billionaire Peter Jackson floats the idea that they can't negotiate terms with the actors because the actors are contractors and essentially they're each a company in the eyes of the law, so to negotiate with the actors would be two companies colluding. It would be anti-competitive and illegal. It doesn't exactly make sense in this case yet, but there is a legal argument there. And a little side note here, at this point, the New Zealand dollar has quite quickly shot back up to 75 cents US dollars. Who knows why I've brought that up. Now, word of this refusal to negotiate makes its way up to the International Federation of Actors, and they issue a do not sign order. None of the actors on The Hobbit, none of them, are to sign their contracts until this negotiation takes place. So it's suddenly a massive deal. The billionaire Peter Jackson flips shit.
To tell the studio why investing $500 million in our country is a good idea when they've just seen the disgusting, frivolous action that's happened, I don't know what to say. I literally don't know what to say to them.
He introduces the idea that there's this Australian union trying to take The Hobbit away from us. They haven't directly been involved in anything at this point, but they are technically backing the Actors Union. Anyway, he drives the media crazy with that. Everyone loves it. There's nothing we love more here than flying into a blind, pathetic rage at the Australians, while they don't really mind what's happening here at all. He's saying they're going to take The Hobbit away from New Zealand. He's also saying he'll fight tooth and nail to keep The Hobbit in New Zealand. No one else is really involved in this discussion at this point, but he's sort of doing both sides of it, making sure it's all out there, and it's very effective. And the thrust is, They won't make The Hobbit in New Zealand if they have to pay the actors fairly. But they do meet with Actors Equity and the government, and they reach an agreement. They'll make The Hobbit here, and they'll give the actors fair pay and residuals. Actually, it turns out fine. There's nothing to worry about. There's just one caveat. They won't publicly announce that a deal's been made until the studio is ready to do so. The guilds know, and the stop work order is lifted. Peter Jackson and the executive team on The Hobbit know, and the government knows, and nobody says anything. And then things get weird.
What happens in a year's time when Warner Brothers have spent $250 million, they're halfway through the film, and the actors decide to have some fun again?
Warner Brothers deploys location scouts to the UK, and there's press releases about this location scouting for alternate Hobbit locations. All the production workers from Peter Jackson's companies, which is a lot of people, are called to a meeting where they're given a presentation on the evils of the New Zealand Actors Union, how there's this Australian union trying to take their jobs. They're given flyers and ready-made protest signs, and they're sent out into the Wellington streets to protest The Hobbit leaving New Zealand, which has a bit of a messy end as some Weta workers go too far and assault some actors in the Wellington street. Now, all the actors know that the stop work order is lifted. They're going on TV going, what? What's going on? Isn't the stop work order lifted? At which point, the billionaire Peter Jackson comes out to say, no, the actors are lying. The Hobbit is leaving us.
We've been told that the blacklist has been coming off every day for like the past 3 weeks. We've been told.
And once again, the production workers are goaded into the streets, now joined by Hobbit heads from around New Zealand to demand that production of The Hobbit stays here.
They don't want extra subsidies, all this conspiracy theory nonsense about them wanting more money and more subsidies, no.
That night, then Prime Minister John Key agreed to give the production more money and more subsidies. Warner Brothers executives were flown in limousine to his house, where he agreed to give them an extra $30 million on top of the now 15% subsidy. And not just that, but he would rework our employment law to make sure that none of the production workers could ever pull anything like that ever again. He rushed it through, and 2 days later, the legislation passed. The Employment Relations Film Production Work Amendment Act 2010, what we call the Hobbit Law. It ensures that all screen workers are by definition contractors and removes their right to collectively bargain. Now, it violates one of the international labour conventions, and it sucks generally. It's a bummer. But it just goes to show you that real political power does still exist, and political change can be effected like that. You know, it's just that that power is only ever used to hand itself away to the market. So if you didn't like The Hobbit, remember it only ever happened because a government gave money directly to a corporation and undermined labour laws. Now, in return, we would hold the first Hobbit premiere here, and every DVD of The Hobbit that contained special features would include New Zealand tourism promo. Pretty cool. Now, without rights anymore, all screen production labour in New Zealand has been devalued. Movies, TV, games, actors, visual effects, composers, if your work is in any way related to screen entertainment, get fucked. While simultaneously this influx of government money is ensuring that this industry grows. And being an industry full of NDAs, power imbalances, with the sudden growth and already pre-existing problems, anyone who has a problem is just fired with no recourse. And they can easily find some idiot fucking dreamer who liked Lord of the Rings as a kid to replace them. Local labour is increasingly paid jack shit because they have no bargaining power, while international labour is increasingly at a premium. The Weta Group's culture continues to spiral out of control. Local TV work is a meat grinder for recent graduates and unpaid interns, and film productions are increasingly unsafe. And our local talent is leaving the industry and or the country in droves. But it's all great news for James Cameron, who's looking for a way to financially realise his dreams of Avatar sequels. He attended an event at Parliament alongside the billionaire Peter Jackson, where it was announced that our screen production grant system would be completely overhauled to now be 20% rebate with an additional 5% uplift if you could prove that you're valuable to New Zealand in some way. And later that day, James Cameron announced that the Avatar sequels would all be made here and they would all be getting the full 25%. Bearing in mind that budget is now looking at probably over $1 billion, that's starting to be a bit of money for a small country. But the theory now is, if we don't do this, we just won't have a film industry. Other countries around the world are now doing similar grant systems, so to stay competitive, we need to fuck ourselves. We're in too deep. Which, if you remember the original plan introducing this system, it's the complete opposite of that. And obviously, at this point, this is pure loss for the government. And even factoring in the quantifiable benefits, it's still a loss. But if you start to factor in the indirect benefits, like, think of all the tourism that Lord of the Rings brought in, that would be worth it. But then that doesn't include the marketing costs of Tourism New Zealand pushing that angle. Anyway, you go back and forth on that for ages in the world of theoretical numbers, and you might start to see that there is some return to be made. But, nobody knows or cares that the Avatar sequels are being made in New Zealand. Who cares that we heavily subsidised live-action Cowboy Bebop, or Game of Thrones Season 8, live-action Mulan, The Meg, Josh Trank's Fantastic Four, and live-action Ghost in the Shell? Who gives a shit? What? We're spending more and more money, and not once have we found the next Lord of the Rings. Now, it doesn't really matter, but it does feel like a slap in the face when, the government can't find money for housing developments or healthcare, but any fucking mega corporation shows up at the door and we will give them hundreds of millions of dollars, no questions asked. One of the things that this grant does is it reduces the risk on the production companies, so they can make theoretically a worse product. A product that they would expect a lower return on. And of course, they're not using that as an opportunity to make art, they're using that as an opportunity to make worse corporate slop. Now, streaming shows don't directly make money. So the goal is to make it back in other ways. Maybe you're an e-commerce website and you're starting a streaming service, so you tie the streaming service to your e-commerce subscription so that people will buy more stuff from your company. I don't know why I said that vaguely. I'm obviously talking about Amazon. But there is the dream scenario that you could make money from streaming. If only you could get everyone in the world subscribed and you basically didn't have any content on your platform and nobody was watching that content on your platform. So you'd have, no overheads and it'd be pure profit. So what everyone needs is the next Game of Thrones. Spoilers for the developments in entertainment news over the next few years, that's not going to happen. None of them are getting that. HBO Max is probably in the process of folding, and I imagine this is the last big outing for Amazon Prime Video. So when Amazon was location scouting for their attempt at the next Game of Thrones, a Lord of the Rings spin-off, the New Zealand government went into panic mode and held a crisis meeting to make sure that Lord of the Rings stays here. It was a little bit controversial at the time that we spent thousands on wining and dining Amazon executives, but we agreed to help fund the most expensive TV show of all time. However, it was justified. This cost would include all the setup costs, building the costumes, the props, the sets, all the infrastructure that will be needed for future seasons. And just think what having an endless streaming Lord of the Rings forever would do for New Zealand tourism. Continued to be controversial as they got special exemption to fly in production workers during the coronavirus lockdown. A lot of New Zealanders were still on the wait list, but the Amazon production team was given priority above them. Again, it doesn't really matter, but there was a feeling that international production labor is just a higher class than New Zealand citizens. And also, they reportedly ran an exploitative, dangerous set with a few quite serious stunt injuries. But god damn it, they got the job done. And with the job done, they moved production to the UK. They shipped off all of that setup and left the New Zealand crew behind. So New Zealand has just funded the setup for Tolkien tourism to leave New Zealand. The one thing that they didn't want to happen. But you know, it probably won't change anything. And in terms of the screen industry, as soon as Amazon left, there was fresh international work coming in to replace it. In fact, we have more international work coming in than we can support. We're turning productions away, which means we're probably doing a bit too good of a job of luring them in. The billionaire Peter Jackson faced some backlash for animal abuse on The Hobbit, so he pulled out his classic trick and blamed the animal trainers who came forward and reported the abuse. He fought to stop the release of a report on where the screen production grant money goes, as it turns out, mostly into his company. He bought out a Wellington mayoral election to stop a housing development near his studios during a housing shortage. He got really into World War I and the Beatles. One of the election promises of Jacinda Ardern's government was to repeal the Hobbit Law in their first 100 days. Unfortunately, the guy in charge of making that change was immediately courted by international studio executives and lobbyists, and he decided to not do that instead. He was later fired for abusing his power in other ways. Now, in their second term, they've introduced the Screen Industry Workers Bill, which restores collective bargaining for screen workers. And nothing else. The workers are still fucked. These industries that had no history of unions don't really have much chance of starting one. The only recourse they have is the occasional media controversy. Weta have taken steps to improve their culture, not because of the workers, what are they gonna do, but because of their image. And as for me, I've never seen these movies. I've never seen these shows. I've no plan to. Fuck all this fantasy shit. Oh, a guy has pointy ears and he's tall. Fuck off. So, sorry to anyone. I've told a lot of people that I've seen Lord of the Rings and Avatar. It was just easier to get out of those conversations if I pretended that I had, okay? It's something that I've done a lot, and I plan to continue to do, actually, but I'm really sorry. Alright, cool. Now, I am working on a very dumb, big video, not like this at all. I'm going to pitch that over on the website, so subscribe there if you want. Otherwise, I probably will have to come up with some other tentpole bullshit to talk around in a fortnight. And I'll see you then.